Some news for the Texans involving some old yet familiar faces. Plus, it's about that time. Fantasy football is upon us. What Texans are worth drafting? Let's go inside the locker room. We got a lot to get into.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the locker room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey. Locker room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do.
What Houston Texans are worth having on your fantasy team? A departure that officially ends one of the most dreadful areas in franchise history. Plus, are you still bitter towards BOB, or have we moved past that? It is the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can see me right here nightly at 10:30, videos throughout the day. And when the season kicks in, it's only going to intensify. I want to ask this question. What Texans are you looking at when it comes to your fantasy team? How many draftable Houston Texans players are there when it comes to fantasy football? For me, the answer is clear. I think there's 6 draftable guys in your fantasy draft. I think CJ Stroud is draftable. We'll talk about how draftable and how soon. I think Joe Mixon is draftable. And then I think the 3 wide receivers, Stefon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and Dalton Schultz are all draftable. Some people, though, I've always found this interesting. Some people don't want to draft guys on division rivals. They don't want to play guys in their fantasy matchup when they're playing their favorite team. I don't understand that. I think all is fair and love and war when it comes to fantasy football. Eric says he's taking Diggs late first, early second if I can. I mean, I think you'll be able to, and that's actually kind of been the range of where Diggs has gone the last couple years in Buffalo. The problem is now he's joined by 2 other second tier-ish receivers, so you don't know if the production's going to be there. If you drafted Diggs last year, you were feeling pretty damn good about yourself early on, and then later on, it could have been something that perhaps that you regretted. And that brings me to the biggest Texans fantasy dilemmas. And number one is, which wide receiver do you take first? And when do you do it? For me personally, I'm not taking a Texans wide receiver in the first round. I'm waiting till the second. And then you're going to have to ask yourself which one of these guys is going to be worthy of being a wide receiver 1. It could change on certain weeks. And the other thing is there more value in waiting and getting the second or third guy and letting someone else make that decision? This is going to be the biggest dilemma that fantasy owners are going to face when it comes to the drafting of fantasy guys. Jay Anamio says he got Nico and Tank on his dynasty squad. Good for you. I'm sure that was really, really good value. The receivers are going to be very, very tricky, though. And that's going to be the biggest dilemma. Johnny, I think any Texans wide receiver you're going to get good value out of. Biggest question is who stays healthy. I don't know if you're going to get good value if you're taking one of these guys in the first round. Maybe, but it's got to be the right one. There's the variables of staying healthy. Nico Collins has missed 12-plus games in his 3 seasons. Tank Dell, we've seen him 1 season, and he wasn't able to stay on the field. Diggs has actually been the most available one. It's just a matter of, is he going to have that chemistry with CJ Stroud? So that's dilemma number 1 right there. And me personally, I'm not taking any of these guys in the first round. If I had to pick one of these guys to select first, I would probably go with Diggs, although I don't think you could go wrong with Nico in the second round. I think Tank Dell is going to be closer to the 4th or 5th round, depending on if you're in a PPR or not. Fantasy dilemma number 2, and be sure to subscribe, right along. It is the slow time of the year. I can tell you that. It is a slow news day for dang sure. But fantasy dilemma number 2 when it comes to the Texans: will production of the wide receiver be consistent? Will there be consistent production, or is it going to be one of those situations like a higher upside, old school Patriots pre-Christian McCaffrey 49ers type of joint where any week it can be a certain guy. Now with the Patriots, you were getting back in their backfield days. One week you'd have a guy get you 30 points, and then the next week he would be inactive or get 2 carries. So even the low side or the floor of the wide receiver production, it's not as bad. But if we're talking about the first round, it can be relatively costly. Dilemma number 3 when it comes to fantasy options for the Houston Texans. Dilemma number 3. When do you take CJ Stroud? And that's what's really, really interesting. When do you take CJ Stroud? Tyler says CJ is number 4 QB off the board. Nico, Tank, and Diggs are all drafted by the 5th round. I agree by the 5th round. Mixon goes in the 3rd as RBs get a boost to ADP, given the plethora of wide receivers that can produce. I think that's good analysis. Now, here's the thing. I earlier I said all is fair in love and fantasy and play division guys and all that. For me, if you're in a league where passing touchdowns are worth 6, I think if you're a Texans fan, taking your quarterback is a pretty fun experience because you're riding and dying with the quarterback. Furthermore, while the amount of weapons that are in that wide receiver room, why it leads to a dilemma for the wide receivers and can lower the value of those 3 guys, it helps the quarterback. The more weapons, the better. So I think if you're going to take CJ Stroud, I would maybe put him number 1 on QB because I think there's a lot to say for being able to watch your team on Sunday, and every time the quarterback succeeds, you're doing well. And I mean, a case can be made that CJ Stroud is a top 3 quarterback anyways, and the weapons are going to help him. I think in some leagues, CJ Stroud is probably the 2nd quarterback taken. So when you take CJ Stroud, first few rounds, I think he's going to be a top 4, top 3 quarterback. But I think there's a lot of fun and enjoyment that comes with having the quarterback of your favorite team and the leader of your favorite team on your fantasy roster. Dilemma number 4, will Dalton Schultz be a upper tier tight end? That's an interesting question because the tight end position, I think most of y'all have noticed this. In fantasy, the tight end position has just completely become a crapshoot. More teams than not in your league are getting little to no production out of the tight end more times than not. There's the upper tier, which if you were one of those people who took Kelsey extremely early last year, you were a little bit disappointed. And if you're one of those people that just took a flyer on Sam Laporta, you were very, very pleased. But the tight end production it's hard to predict. Now, Dalton Schultz, he and CJ Stroud do have chemistry. There's a lot of ways to look at this. Do you think the middle of the field is going to be more open for Schultz with all these receivers? It's hard for me to imagine a scenario where defensive coordinators and coaching staffs are dedicating too much attention to stopping Dalton Schultz. So that could open up the field. Or do you think there's only a certain amount of production out there and it's going to be hard for Dalton Schultz to get a chunk of the pie? I think Dalton Schultz is maybe a top 10 tight end. He could end up being top 8, top 5 from a production standpoint. But the tight end position has just become such a crapshoot that, Kyle Pitts syndrome. Yeah, and someone's going to fall for it again this year. Speaking of tight ends, I don't know if y'all saw this, but DeMeco Ryans is very high on Brevin Jordan. He says Brevin Jordan can be a dude for the Texans. And maybe we're not giving Brevin Jordan enough attention. Last year, speaking with him, he thought that his career was on the line, and he ended up getting hurt in camp, and they still believed in him, and he rewarded their belief at many times. There were also times where he was asked to block, and he appeared to be a little bit lost. But DeMeco Ryans, I think he told Aaron Wilson that he's pretty high on Brevin Jordan, which I think is interesting. But no one's drafting Brevin Jordan in tight end. Now, if Dalton Schultz gets hurt, then yes, you probably want to kick the tires on Brevin Jordan. But will Schultz be a upper tier tight end? That's the question. He'll be a decent steal pickup in the later rounds, perhaps. Fringe top 10, too many other weapons when it comes to to him. The throws CJ was making last season were so impressive. It's hard to foresee a sophomore slump. Now, I mean, it's a no-brainer to take CJ in your fantasy draft. It's just a matter of when. Love the receivers, but I'll probably stay away from Houston's tight ends unless they fall to me. Situational deal for sure. I agree. I mean, you got to go try to find someone who's going to be higher up on the power rankings of weapons for his squad. Listening to Landry Legend on Monday. Let's go. Yes, sir. Slow news day, obviously. But yeah, that's some of the fantasy stuff. I'm taking Nico and Tank over Diggs, honestly. Okay. I'm not, but look, I don't know the right answer to that question. Your guess is as good as mine. Some news with involving the Houston Texans, some familiar faces, some potential animosity from the past. We'll get to in a sec. But to answer the previous question, how many draftable fantasy players are on the Texans roster? I think there's 6. CJ Stroud in the early rounds as a quarterback. Joe Mixon, I think round 3 or 4 for him. And I could see it even earlier. Stefon Diggs, Dell, Collins, Nico, and then Dalton Schultz. So I would say 6. I don't know if there's any handcuffs or anything worth taking. I'm not going with Dameon Pierce handcuffs or anything like that. But the 4 biggest dilemmas to reset it before we get to this familiar face news-ish type stuff. I'm kind of calling a little bit of a bluff on this. Which wide receiver do you take in the first? Will production of wide receiver be consistent? When do you take CJ Stroud? And will Dalton Schultz be an upper tier tight end? Those are the questions. Be sure to answer them, discuss amongst yourself. News involving someone who was, let's just be honest, he's an interesting character, but he is a guy who the Texans would not have had the success that they had last year without him. Regardless of how you feel about him, Steven Nelson announces his retirement. Now, I don't know that I believe this. I think Steven Nelson plays football this upcoming season. I don't think he wants to go to training camp. I don't think he's getting the offers that he feels that he deserves. So I'm looking at this kind of sideways because I still think he can be a decent player in this league. I do think he might have left it all on the field last year. But the Steven Nelson situation is one that I'll be watching. Now, are the Texans going to give him a call? Like if the Texans look at Jeff Okudah and Henderson and they feel they need a corner, are they going to call him? I think that ship has sailed. But Steven Nelson has announced his retirement. Keep an eye on that. Regardless of how you feel about him, how silly he is, he was very respected in that locker room, very admired in that locker room. And Steven Nelson is a guy, let's just be real. Without him, they don't do what they did last year. I think we can all agree on that. There was an interesting interview kind of making the rounds that he does have a podcast, Steven Nelson. But there was an interesting interview making the rounds that I actually kind of took a look at. Bill O'Brien sat down with Adam Brenneman and Christian Hackenberg, and he basically reflected on his coaching career. A strong recommendation. It's next up with Adam Brenneman. I'll actually link the comments if y'all want to check it out. Strong recommendation for it. But I found it kind of interesting. B.O.B. pretty reflective-ish, not 100% accountable. But my question for you is this: as a Texans fan who went through hell with Bill O'Brien and who probably blames O'Brien for the darkest, or at least puts him on the power rankings, near the top of the power rankings, in regards to one of the darkest times in franchise history, really in recent history in the NFL. Are Texans fans rooting against Bill O'Brien? In other words, when you turn on Boston College, are you going to be actively rooting against Bill O'Brien? Or has enough time passed to where you just want to go move on and don't care? Because there's going to be a time this year, maybe on a Friday night, maybe on a Thursday night, hell, maybe a Saturday morning, you're going to turn on the TV, you're going to see Boston College, you're going to see Bill O'Brien. Are you going to be rooting against Bill O'Brien, or has that ship kind of sailed? That's my question for you. For me personally, I'll always root against Bill O'Brien. From now till the end, I will always root against Bill O'Brien. I liked Bill O'Brien. Had beers with Bill O'Brien. He didn't always agree with what I said, but I like the guy. But from a football standpoint, the way in which stuff went and the desire to intensively butt heads with the GM while not wanting the title until they officially gave it to you. I will actively be rooting against Bill O'Brien from now till the end of time. And good for him. He got his 20 million, whatever. So props to him. But yes, I personally, petty me, will be rooting against Bill O'Brien. Brandon H says, hard to not hold a grudge versus him for dismantling the team and making Hopkins and Watt leave. D-Town doesn't care much about B.O.B. That's fair. But you're going to root for someone, right, when you turn on a football game. Paying Osweiler, I don't necessarily fault him for that. I think they actively tried to find a quarterback, and that was the best one on the market. They actually did a pretty good job there for sure. Next item of news regarding the Houston Texans, Dylan Thompson is gone. Dylan Thompson is gone. Now, a lot of you might be like, who the hell is Dylan Thompson? Dylan Thompson was a guy who was at South Carolina when Jack Easterby was at South Carolina. And they actually did a couple podcasts together. Strong man of faith. And a guy that you could kind of see that he was going to end up here. I think we even called the shot on the show. But Dylan Thompson, he came into the building with Jack Easterby, kind of like a character coach. The Texans are one of the few teams that have this position. And when Jack Easterby left, Dylan Thompson hung around. Now, I will say this about Dylan Thompson. First of all, I've never heard a player, not only have I never heard a player say a bad thing about him, I've heard players go out of their way unsolicited to praise Dylan Thompson for the work he did. Also, after practice, like when Nico Collins is getting extra work in, or when the players are running routes before games, Dylan Thompson is the guy who is throwing the ball to him and warming up with them. But this is the last guy in the building, unless you count Caserio. And I think that ship's kind of sailed and that connection's not what it was. This is the last guy in the building that was brought in by Jack Easterby, and he will go to Washington for the same position. And you've heard CJ talk good about him. You've heard Brevin talk good about him. Never heard anything bad about him, but that kind of puts a bow on the Easterby show. Appreciate everyone for coming through. The night stream will be a little bit longer. Again, this is the dark days of the content period. You ask anybody in the media business when the darkest time of the year is, and when there's the least amount of content. This is 100% when it is. Appreciate y'all for coming through. Subscribe, like, ride along. Let me know what you're doing with your fantasy team when it comes to the Texans. Let me know if you'll be rooting for or against Bill O'Brien. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Thanks for coming through.
The source, we the pulse of the city too. Landlocked, got the game in the headlock. Localized every time, can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not too. Plugged in daily digital on YouTube. We got taste for days, opinions to give, we got takeaways. If it's up, then it's up, we number 1. You don't need to try your luck. Locker room, yeah, we in the locker room.